The sun was sinking low, turning the sky the color of old blood, when they pulled her through the main street of Dry Creek. Dust rose with every step she stumbled, clinging to her bare ankles and the hem of her. She lost her balance. People lined the street in tight, whispering clusters, men with hardened faces, women clutching shawls to their chests, children peeking out from behind fence posts. No one met her eyes for long. In this town, fear was easier than truth. The gallows stood at the edge of the square, dark and ugly against the glowing horizon. She had passed it 100 times in her life and never imagined she would climb its steps. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might split her ribs. They said she stole horses. She hadn't. Everyone knew she survived by cleaning houses and tending the small graveyard on the hill. But the sheriff needed order, and order demanded a culprit. The sheriff cleared his throat and unrolled a paper with practiced boredom. His voice carried across the square, flat and final, listing crimes that did not belong to her. As he spoke, her thoughts drifted to her mother's face, to the smell of rain on dry earth, to the quiet moments when she believed her life might one day be more than survival. A tear slipped down her cheek, carving a clean line through the dust. She lifted her head and scanned the crowd anyway. Hope was foolish, but it refused to die. She searched for anyone, who might remember her kindness, her honesty, her small acts of care. Most looked away, some watched with open satisfaction. Then she saw him. He stood slightly apart from the others, leaning on the rail of the hitching post. His coat was faded, his boots scarred from long miles. A black band circled his hat, and beneath its brim were eyes worn deep by loss. He looked like a man who had already buried half his soul. Yet when his gaze met hers, something shifted. There was no hunger there, no judgment, only recognition. As if he saw not a condemned woman, but a human being standing at the edge of the world. For a brief, impossible moment, the noise of the crowd faded. She felt exposed under his stare, yet strangely steady. He took a step forward, then another, boots crunching softly in the dirt. Murmurs rippled through the square. The sheriff noticed and frowned, irritation flashing across his face. The noose was lifted, the rope creaking as it swung gently in the warm evening air. Her breath caught. The sheriff raised his hand to bring the sentence to its end. That was when the cowboy spoke. His voice was low, rough, but it carried like a gunshot through the silence. Stop. He stepped fully into the open now, shoulders squared, grief and resolve standing side by side in his eyes. Every head turned toward him. The sheriff scoffed, already ready to dismiss him. But the cowboy didn't flinch. He looked from the rope to the girl, then back to the lawman, and said words no one in Dry Creek would ever forget. "I'll take her place." A stunned silence swallowed the square. For a heartbeat, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The sheriff let out a short, humorless laugh, tipping his hat back as if he'd misheard. "You got a twisted sense of humor, cowboy," he said, eyes narrowing. "Step back before you cause trouble." But the cowboy didn't move. He stepped closer instead, boots firm in the dirt, his face carved from resolve. Up close, the lines around his eyes told a story of sleepless nights and long days under a merciless sun. He smelled of leather and dust, of a life lived hard and honestly. "I ain't jokin'," he said. "She didn't steal no horses." The crowd began to murmur, uncertainty rippling through them like a nervous twitch. The girl stared at him, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Please," she whispered, shaking her head, though her words barely carried. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he would do this. All she knew was that no one had ever stood between her and death before. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You got proof?" he demanded. The cowboy's gaze flicked briefly to the horizon, where the last of the sun bled into night. "I got eyes," he said quietly. "I seen her every morning up on the hill, cleanin' graves. I seen her hands, cracked, honest hands, not the kind that steal. And I seen the men who did take them horses ridin' east before dawn." He paused, then added, "You let them go." The accusation struck like a slap. The sheriff's face flushed with anger. "Careful," he warned. "You're treading on thin ground." The cowboy took another step forward, stopping just short of the gallows. "Thin ground don't scare me none," he replied. His voice softened as he spoke again, carrying a weight that silenced the square. "I buried my wife 2 winters back. Fever took her slow. I stood by and watched, helpless. Since then, every sunrise feels borrowed. If you need a body to hang to prove you're still the law, take mine." A sharp intake of breath spread through the crowd. Some women covered their mouths. Others looked away, ashamed. The girl felt her knees weaken. No, she cried out, tears streaming freely now. You can't. I won't let you. He finally looked at her fully then, and his expression gentled in a way that made her chest ache. Listen to me, he said, barely louder than a whisper meant only for her. You got a life yet to live. Don't let it end on this rope. The sheriff hesitated, eyes darting from the watching townsfolk to the cowboy's steady face. Authority thrived on certainty, and certainty was slipping through his fingers. With a sharp gesture, he signaled to the deputies. Fine, he snapped. You wanna play hero? Cut her loose. The rope fell from her wrists, leaving angry red marks behind. Before she could steady herself, the deputies seized the cowboy, forcing his hands behind his back. He didn't resist. As they led him to the steps of the gallows, the noose was lowered once more, this time toward his neck. The girl lunged forward, but strong hands held her back. Stop, she screamed, her voice breaking. This is wrong. He turned his head just enough to meet her eyes one last time. Despite the rope and the guns and the gathering darkness, he smiled, small, sad, and fearless. Live, he said softly. And as the night crept in and the town watched, love, raw, sudden, and born of sacrifice, took its first breath between them. The sound of hooves thundered through the main street like a warning, kicking up clouds of dust that curled around the gallows. The cowboy's hands were bound, the rope rough against his wrists, and his eyes were fixed on the girl, whose own hands shook as she pressed against the deputies holding her back. The sun had vanished behind the hills, leaving streaks of fire in the sky that reflected off the sweat on his face. Every heartbeat sounded louder than the last, a drum of tension that matched the pounding hooves. A rider burst through the crowd, a young messenger from the neighboring town, waving a bundle of papers high. Stop, stop the hanging. The thieves have been caught, they confessed. He shouted, voice slicing through the night like a whip. The sheriff froze mid-motion, his hand raised to pull the lever. The town held its collective breath, the wind carrying the weight of what might be, poised between disaster and salvation. The cowboy's gaze flicked to the messenger, then back to the sheriff. His jaw clenched as the truth settled over the square. Tell him, he said quietly to the girl, as if he'd been carrying hope in his chest all along. She stepped forward, tears streaming, barely able to speak. It's true. They took the horses. I didn't. Her words dissolved into sobs. The sheriff's face flushed red, then paled as he snatched the papers and read them aloud. The confessions were clear, signed and sworn. The rope fell slack around the cowboy's neck before it could tighten, and a collective gasp rolled through the crowd. He staggered forward, trembling, but the girl was there in an instant, her arms wrapped around him. The warmth of her embrace pressed against the cold dirt of the gallows, grounding him, reminding him that he was still alive, still human, still capable of being loved. For a moment, time itself seemed to stretch. The town watched in silence as she clung to him, and he, still catching his breath, held her back just as tightly, as if he could keep her safe simply by holding her close. The sheriff stepped back, embarrassed, muttering apologies that fell flat in the cool night air. People began to whisper, murmurs of relief and awe spreading like wildfire. Some looked at the cowboy with newfound respect, others at the girl with quiet wonder. But between them, there was nothing but the immediate, undeniable connection of lives nearly lost and hearts newly found. He tilted his head toward her, brushing a strand of dust-streaked hair from her face. You scared me, he admitted softly, voice rough but tender. She laughed through her tears, leaning into him, trembling with relief and something else, something wild and electric. You risked your life for me, she whispered. For me. I couldn't let them take you, he said, lips barely brushing hers. Not when I've seen what it means to lose someone you love. The girl's hands rested against his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart under her palms. And then, under the open sky, the dirt-stained gallows forgotten, the town faded into the background. Only the two of them remained, bound not by ropes or law, but by courage, sacrifice, and a love that had bloomed in the dust and danger of the Wild West. The stars began to prick the sky with light, and for the first time, she felt truly free. And he, once a widower wandering the plains of grief, felt his heart stir with a hope he thought long buried. In that instant, both of them knew, this was the start of everything worth fighting for.